This is the Soul-Filled Sisterhood podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist and an empowerment mentor for women. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute, nor is it to convey professional, psychological, financial, or medical advice. If you could use such services, please seek them out from someone you trust. Now here is today's episode. Episode 66. Well, welcome. In last week's episode, I announced the upcoming summit, the Self-Care Summit, Improve Your Bottom Line and Your Personal Life, that begins October 7th. And I'm going to reiterate that today. If you have not heard about it, you can go out to www.selfcaresummitforwomen.com to sign up, see what it's about. It's a virtual summit. It has 7 different interviews on it. And my guest today is actually taking part of this summit as well. And I'm really excited to share this with you ladies, because we're actually going to talk about 7 different areas of your life, from health to career to having fun to spirituality. So many great topics on there and so many great coaches that I had these great conversations with. It starts on October 7th, so you need to sign up prior to that. If for some reason you miss it, it will be available for purchase afterwards. But if you sign up before, you will get it for free. What's going to happen is every Monday, Wednesday, and one Friday, you will receive these emails right into your inbox. You'll just click on the video, grab some paper and pen so that you can take some great notes. And then on October 11th and October 25th, you have an opportunity to actually join me via Zoom live for any questions you may have regarding the summit, things that maybe have come up for you during our time together, where you can ask me whatever you want to regarding self-care. And I really cannot wait to do this summit and to share this with you. I've had some great conversations with these ladies that I interviewed. I designed this summit to also be in true HSP fashion, which means there's not 12 to 20 to 30 different presenters that are going to be on there, or different guests. I'm interviewed 6 different women, and then myself as well will be on there. And it's going to be done on that Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, just to keep it spaced out so that you can really slow down and take in what you're hearing from these interviews and do it in a pace that actually works a little more in alignment with who you are. Again, go out to selfcaresummitforwomen.com to sign up. It's free up until October 7th, and after that it will be available for purchase. So I hope to see you on it. Now here is today's episode. Well, welcome, sisters. I am so excited about my next guest. Today I have Kat Rose on, and Kat helps creative introverts show their work and get the exposure they deserve. She does this through the League of Creative Introverts online community, as well as one-to-one coaching and her podcast, The Creative Introvert. Her current aim is to help all her clients do what they love and realize their dreams whilst honoring their personality type and preferences. Oh, Kat, I am so excited that you are on today and for the work that you do. So welcome.
Thank you, Nicole. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited too.
Well, share with my listeners just a little bit. What do you mean when you talk about that creative introvert? What does that mean? What does that mean to you? Or how do you describe that, I guess, to your community?
Yeah, it's difficult because I think both creativity and introversion have multiple definitions.
Mm-hmm.
I think when people hear that term, they usually kind of find their own way of thinking about it. And for me, I mean, it was a phrase that kind of came to me when I was struggling to make my career as a creative. So, when I think about creativity, it's creativity with a small c, which might be, typical things like making art or writing,
Mm-hmm.
things that we associate with traditional creativity. But I think it can also be broadened to just like problem solving, using our imagination, coming up with solutions and ideas. That's creativity too. So that's that bit. The introversion part is a little bit simpler. I basically define introversion as people who get their energy from spending time alone more so than when they're in groups of people or social situations, and a way of processing information, so sensory input, has a bit of a different effect on introverts. We're less, we can be overly stimulated by external stimulation,
Mm-hmm.
and spend a little bit longer to process information, which is why my speech is peppered with ums and likes and my excuses. I'm an introvert. It takes me a bit longer to articulate my thoughts, better at writing them down.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these things, they kind of get squished together when I talk about creativity and introversion. But I'm definitely open to other definitions of both those words as well.
Well, I like though, and I totally forgot my other question, which I'm going to come back to in a second, but I like how there's an inclusion of the both
Mm.
and it's not the either or, and that each person that you work with really can define that in their own way. And just even you saying, as an introvert, I've got a lot of ums and things like that, because it does take a longer time to like this pause and kind of gather some of those thoughts before you say them out loud. And it's totally fine. It's not better or worse than being an extrovert, or it's not we're not in this push pull or a war, I guess, in a sense, between introversion is better than extroversion. It's just there's a difference in this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Well, yeah, I was just thinking, just like you said, neither is right or wrong. I think there is a lot of kind of media out there right now, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, that will tell you, why your camp is better than the other. And that's not good. That's not what I'm trying to do.
correct. Yes, I love the whole message of the inclusion piece of it. And you create this space for people to truly land in a soft space. And so my question that I totally skipped over because I was so excited about you defining creative introvert is share a little bit with my listeners, like how you got to this place where you're doing the coaching, like where you are right now, like what got you here?
Sure. Well, I kind of hinted at it when I was talking about creativity, but my background is in digital design, web design, that kind of thing. I was working in an open plan office space in London. As you know, I was quite lucky. I was fresh out of university, and I landed this job, which on paper looked great. But it wasn't long before I realized that I wasn't really cut out for that kind of agency environment. As sexy as it might appear on TV, it was not good for me. London's a great city. It's not fun for a highly sensitive introvert to
Yeah.
be in. I found anyway. So ultimately, I quit that job to go freelance. I remember just hearing about the concept of freelancing, and I had this amazing picture of me only ever working in my pajamas, getting up whenever I wanted, just sitting in bed with my laptop and getting loads of clients. Of course, I was also rolling in it in this fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
The reality of that was a bit different. I realized that actually getting clients was a lot more than having a pretty website. I would actually have to go out there and connect with real people. And realizing all of this and listening to marketing podcasts and trying to learn as much as I could about getting my work out there, I realized that I was struggling, and I was talking to a friend about my challenges, and he pointed out that I'm an introvert, and that's okay. I just need to find a different way of doing things. And when he first said that, I kind of thought, and I think I argued for a while as well, no, I'm not an introvert. I've gotten over my childhood shyness. And he clarified it for me that introversion is not the same as shyness. Shyness is a different trait altogether. And pointed me in the direction of Susan Cain's work. And that was really eye-opening for me. And I felt like, oh, there's a name for this kind of mixture of feelings and preferences, and it's introversion.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of opens a lot of doors to do with self-knowledge for me. And I quite quickly realized that I would have to do things differently. And now that I understood myself better, I could. So I did start going to I still just thinking about networking events, because I do tell people that I generally don't find them useful, but I do think that meeting up with like minds is not just useful, it's vital.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a group of illustrators, and we would meet up in London. And I remember realizing as well, especially when I was learning more about introversion, that pretty much everyone I was speaking to was also an introvert. And, we were there and just trying to have enough of our beer in order to feel like we could talk to each other. And, it was quite clear that I wasn't alone in this.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, ultimately, I realized that I wanted to connect with other people online, not just in person, because that could be quite draining. And I set up a Facebook group, the League of Creative Introverts, invited a bunch of random people, strangers actually,
Mm-hmm.
from both introversion groups and creative, illustrators, designers, that kind of thing, groups, and kind of formed this mishmash of creative introverts. And that's kind of how that all started. At the same time, I started blogging more about my experiences, not just with marketing, because I originally had like a kind of pretty straightforward, this is how you do online marketing blog. And then I started talking more about the psychology behind it, the mindset, all of that stuff.
Well, I love it. And there's two things that really stood out to me. One, with that self-knowledge for myself, for you, for the clients that I work with, I like to refer that it's like you're coming back to self, you're coming back to your soul. And so instead of trying to be somebody,
Completely.
yeah, instead of you trying to be somebody you're not, it's like, oh my gosh, this is lovely. It's just amazing how the world just truly shifts when you
Yes.
really reconnect with yourself.
Yeah, and it's an ongoing process.
Yes.
Like I'm discovering things about myself and the people around me on a daily basis, and it's just it feels like you said, you're remembering something rather than
Yes.
learning something brand new.
Yes, exactly. And the second thing you said regarding kind of the networking piece of it and being around other introverts and the creatives, that Dr. Elaine Aaron, because you did say that, you're an HSP, and I know that about you from a previous conversation, that she talks about the importance of community. And it really is true.
Mm.
Because especially for HSPs, because we're less than 20% of the population, to know that you're really not alone in the world, that there's others who, again, they may be on a different scale of that sensitivity piece of it, but yet they still understand where you're coming from. And so that inclusion, again, being in that safe space, that it just helps you land truly in a soft spot and just be held.
Yeah, and just having those conversations with people who get it and get you, and being able to reflect that back to each other. That's really, I mean, the word empowering is overused. I'm trying to search for better words, but for somebody who, like, I didn't come into this world with like a bunch of confidence, or if I did, I forgot about it quite quickly.
Mhm.
But having a group like that around me definitely helped with that kind of self confidence element as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think again, like what you're saying too, sometimes our lack of self-confidence can be a learned behavior. And so when you start to get around like these like-minded people, all of a sudden, like you said earlier, it is remembering. And it's like, oh, I do have that within inside myself. And look, every time I take these small steps and I get outside my comfort zone, I'm feeling better and more courageous, because it's like, yeah, you're taking action so that those fears and worries don't run everything. And that, I mean, you did it. I know you were telling me before that, you created your own meetup group. And I'm like, wow, that's, I just thought that was so impressive. And that was part of how you did your networking. And yeah,
Yes.
it's beautiful.
That was definitely a risk.
Yeah.
And I certainly there were a few early sessions where there would be surprises, and it was always like every time I went, my adrenaline would be up there, because it was like, I don't know who's going to show up.
Hmm.
This is like the hippie town. So this is when, just for the audience who haven't heard that conversation,
Hmm.
I'd moved from London to Brighton, a very like alternative, very cool city by the sea in Britain. And I, yeah, you just couldn't tell who was going to show up. And, most people were just awesome. And some of my best friends came from that meetup group still today. But yeah, there were definitely some issues I had to deal with. And in terms of like who showed up. And that again taught me a lot about myself. And these are skills that I wouldn't have developed anywhere else, or even just from going to somebody else's meetup group.
Right.
Um, Being in that role of facilitator was really powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's being brave to step into it. You know, Brene Brown talks about being in the arena so that, yeah,
Yes.
if things don't go right, it's like, all right, you fell down, you got dirty, maybe even got a little bloody, get up, kind of dust yourself off, go, what did I learn about that? And
Mm.
you take that next step forward. But there's a gentleness and self-compassion that you have during those moments where you may think, oh, this was a failure, or I didn't do this right. It's like, no, you did it. That's the
Yeah.
biggest thing. You took the risk and took the chance. And so maybe you had this expectation of what it was going to look like or wanted it to look like, and something else showed up. And it's leaning into those moments. It's like, oh, okay, I'm learning to let go of the expectations and letting it be what it's going to be. And if I need to set some boundaries around things, I can.
Yeah. Oh, you've just reminded me of what that feeling of, let's say you've just done something very scary for the first time. I'm thinking about the time I did improv comedy, and
Hmm.
I remember going to bed that night, kind of like still sweaty, still being like, oh God, was that a terrible idea? Did I just make a fool out of myself? Like not feeling particularly good, and maybe it took me a while to get to sleep. But the next day, feeling as if I'd just slain a dragon,
Hmm.
the night before, and feeling, yeah, a bit tired and a bit sensitive,
Hmm.
but also just massively strengthened by that experience. And I think if we're not doing things that make us feel like that fairly regularly, or at least occasionally, um, yeah, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice.
Absolutely. The term that I hear often is you're playing small. And at different points in time
Yeah.
in my life, that used to frustrate me because I'm like, I'm not playing small. What are you talking about? And now I understand it from a very different viewpoint. It's like, oh, yeah, if I don't stretch myself, I grow
Mm.
stagnant. I grow bored.
Yes.
And it's like then my fear will grow bigger because I'm not stretching myself.
Yes. Yeah. Well, exactly. And almost making that a practice. I mean,
Yes.
I like thinking about routine and practice, and kind of like taking things down a peg. Not everything has to be some giant like event.
Right.
Um, we can choose to just be like, okay, so this is my this is that thing that I do, like an athlete who has to train.
Hmm.
I need to train my fear muscle, or confidence muscle, courage muscle.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great example, that doing the improv and worrying about that. And to me, I will do that even when it comes to podcasting, right? I've been doing this for a while now, and I still have these moments like, oh my gosh, did that make sense? They sounded like it made sense when I was talking to the other person, but I will have those worries that come up. I'm like, you know what? It's going to be what it's going to be. People are going to resonate or it's not, and that's okay. But this is me stretching
Mm.
myself, me getting out there and knowing people. And I would not trade this experience for anything because it has definitely grown my confidence level.
Yeah, yeah. It's just having to put up with that voice,
Yes.
who I know all too well. Oh, did you hear yourself just then? Like, and then you just have to remember to tell that voice to pipe down.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, another question I have for you, I am curious because I am sure over your years that doing this, being creative and an introvert and all that, what are some of the myths that you hear from those that you've worked with or know of, where it's like, what are some of those myths that really negatively impact creatives? I mean, I know there's a slew of them, but I'm curious, like, what are some of the top themes that you typically hear about?
Oh, there's so many. Something that came to mind then, particularly to do with, well, both introversion and creativity,
Hmm.
is that we do our best work, or we should only work alone. And I mean, it's difficult because I do think I do a lot of my best focused work alone. That's
Yes.
true. But
Yeah.
that's for like, 3 hours a day,
Mhm.
on a good day. The rest of the time, if I'm not in some way working with somebody else, whether it's speaking to somebody on the podcast, um, collaborating, serving a client, then I mean, again, I'm just kind of like, first of all, I'm keeping all of my creativity for myself, which just isn't very nice. And I'm not growing.
Mhm.
So, I can only push myself to grow so much, but I really need somebody else to trigger those other creative energies. um, and to bounce off. One of my best collaborations ever was working with a fellow coach, Taya Anderson. We put on a live event, and again, this is something which is laughable even now, when I reflect on it. To the introvert in me, like, what was I thinking putting on a full day event with, I think we had like over 20 speakers, and it was insane, right? But she's an extrovert, and the way we kind of worked with each other, and she's like a feeling type, and a lot more like, yeah, like more intuitive than me, even though I would count myself as intuitive. But I could much better do the behind the scenes things, do the technical side of things, send out a bunch of emails, that kind of thing. So we worked together so well, I think, at picking up where the other one had left off,
Yes.
filling in the lack of somebody else. And yeah, just experiences like that couldn't have happened on my own.
Well, and again, that taking the risk, stepping into that, going, okay, can I do this? And that's the beauty again of like what you're saying, that collaboration that you two can mirror, and it becomes what's the word I'm looking for? Like the synchronicity, because she has certain strengths and so do you. And
Yeah.
together it's extremely powerful and impactful. And so, yeah, trusting that.
Completely. So yeah, creatives, I would really just encourage every kind of creative to find a way or brainstorm ways to collaborate, even if it's just having a coffee chat. And because that's how it started with the live event. Me and Taya were introduced by a mutual friend, and we would meet up for coffee, and very quickly, sharing our ideas, we realized that we could form this thing. So that's one thing. Yeah, and I mean, some of the myths in my own world, I mean, definitely the shyness one, which would, that always comes up if I'm speaking to somebody at a networking event. And I talk about the creative introvert, and that is still believed that, all introverts are shy, socially anxious, we don't like people, all of that stuff. And I just think, come on now, it's time to like start reframing that, and to not let introversion become some kind of debilitating label that, or an excuse, which I think, I mean, introverts ourselves, like, we are responsible for that as well. It's not just other people putting this label on us, we're doing it to ourselves as well. But yeah, like, I really get such a kick out of having particularly one-to-one conversations, particularly about the big things. So hence why we're not talking about the weather right now, we're talking about the big things. And this is energizing for me, even if it's like, oh, I might be a bit nervous and all of that stuff. It's still like a highlight of my day, and that's why I love the podcast. So yeah, I think, and I wouldn't have known that had I maybe even just read a book about introversion. As great as some of these books are, nothing in it tells me that, oh, by the way, I should try something like podcasting, because maybe, I'm not saying it's great for every introvert, but maybe that is going to be the thing that really breathes a new life into my creative work. So I had to experiment with a lot of different things to work out where my introverted creative energy could best be put to use. And yeah, basically, in short, don't let books or like online introvert memes dictate to you what you're going to be a good fit for.
And I like that right there, giving yourself permission to truly try different things and see what really does light you up. And I know through the psychology lens that can change a little bit over our developmental stages of life. Like what may have lit you up younger, like, oh, it's now morphed into something else over here. And it's like, and it's okay to shift and pivot. It really is. So giving yourself permission to be able to do that.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And I remember it comes up quite a lot on my own podcast. People say that, I used to be more introverted, now I'm more extroverted, or vice versa. So I think that's just fascinating to me. I mean, first of all, I'm not sure if that's even possible, but if it is, I understand it's objectively not.
That's my
yeah,
opinion. But yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, I agree from a more scientific perspective, because our brains may be wired slightly differently.
Correct.
But I do think that we can train ourselves. Like I talk about
Yeah.
extroverting. And this is something I do occasionally, not every day of the week, but you know, and like a practice, like we were talking about courage and stuff, it's something that I've gotten better at through practice.
Yes. That I think that's what it really is. Like even from the Myers-Briggs training that I did, there, for an NF, we extrovert our feelings because I'm an
Mm,
INFJ. And so we extrovert our feelings. And then the intuition piece of it is typically the introverted side of it. And so what people will say is, oh, you're more extroverted. And the reality is, no, I may be able to articulate myself sometimes really clearly, and other times maybe not as much, but I will talk through different things, often like what you're even saying. And I like to get out and actually do presentations. I used to do that in different, past lives type of things, and it was fun. And so some people will say, well, an introvert can't do that. Yes, you can.
mm,
It doesn't make you an extrovert. It is the practice. What does make you what you enjoy? So maybe it's the podcasting, maybe it's public speaking, maybe it's, I don't know, doing something behind the scenes where you pull it all together. Whatever that is, it's all okay. It's just, yeah, that self-confidence begins to grow and you may look more extroverted because you're putting yourself out there more. But we know as HSPs and introverts, you definitely need to have built-in downtime after that to
mm,
recharge,
yes.
recuperate from that.
Yeah, and that's not always easy for me to do. Even remembering, okay, so I've got these kind of like um, preferences and traits. Like actually taking that time, and I mean that is something that I've had to learn over
Hmm.
time to like
Yep.
give myself permission to have that downtime and not feel bad because I've been a bit of a hermit that day.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, again, it's this whole thing, getting curious really with yourself, right? Where am I at right now in this stage of my life and what works for me? Again, maybe when I was younger, I could do X, Y, and Z for hours at a time. And now that I'm getting older, yeah, it doesn't work for me as much. And that's totally fine. It's not right or wrong. It is what it is. And so to have that self-compassion to like, oh, I need this and truly build that in, because it is easy, at least I know for me too. It's easy for me to forget that. And it's like, oh my gosh, I get so excited about these conversations, like what you were saying. And I get very ramped up and excited. And then it takes me a little bit to calm my system back down because I'm like, oh, I love that conversation. It was so deep. It was so great. And it's like, yeah, well, just make sure you've got some space in between and go from there.
Yeah, I mean, it just reminds me of so much of what we do, what we kind of like fool ourselves into thinking we need to be or do.
Hmm.
So, having an online business and paying attention to what's happening in the online space, especially in um, our industries. You might be scrolling through Instagram or whatever, and then kind of completely forgetting everything I know about myself and thinking, okay, I can see what this person appears to be doing. I guess I have to be doing that now.
Hmm.
Oh no, why am I not doing that? Oh no, now I'm gonna go beat myself up and
Yeah.
cry into a pint of Ben and Jerry's. Yeah, so I mean it's just that just reminded me of how we forget.
Yeah.
We forget what we are.
Absolutely. And then it goes back to what you had stated earlier. It's that remembering, oh, this is me. It's that when I jump over onto somebody else's lane and I get into that comparison piece of it, they get to do them. I get to do me. And what works for them may not work for me. And that's all okay. There's enough space and enough people in our world that it all works.
Yeah, yeah. We
Yeah.
just need to keep remembering that.
Yes. Exactly. Maybe what do you hear, I guess, the work that you do and maybe in your own life, what are some of the common themes that you hear or for creatives that really help them move through? If there's any of these myths that come up or these blocks that come up, what are some things that have helped maybe you move through, or the work that you do with them move through these blocks or stuckness? Other
um, yeah, this is big, and it's probably one of my favorite things to talk about because it's just such a big part of life for a creative introvert, and I think many people. For me, writing is the number one go-to if I'm feeling stuck, confused, scared about the future. It always comes back to, okay, how can I express my ideas, thoughts, worries on a piece of paper? And it sounds like laughably simple, and why would it make any difference? And as a, you can probably tell me psychologically like why it's so powerful, but for me, just ruminating about something clearly doesn't help. So I have to kind of get those ideas down, and it's almost like a ritual act. Like I'm
Yeah.
just going to have to like purge these ideas onto a piece of paper. The paper can deal with it then, and it works every time. 3
Yep.
a.m. thoughts, waking up. I can always go back to sleep if I write those ideas down. So yeah, journaling has become a really big part of my own process, and I always say that to my audience, and probably they want me to stop saying it now, but I just can't think of anything better.
Well, and you've hit it. I'm laughing only because, yeah, psychologically, there's this kinesthetic connection that happens, right? And so I work mostly with really anxious folks. And when their fears are getting
Mm,
in their way and they're just ruminating, like you said, that kinesthetic piece of it, when you do the journaling, when you do the writing, the brain will oftentimes like, oh, okay, I don't need to go around this 50,000 times for you because I think you're
yeah.
going to forget it. And so when you put it down,
Yes.
how it visually sees, oh, you do have it. You do get that I'm really worried about X, Y, and Z. And you're like, yep, and I can leave that and I can refer back to it at any point in time that I may choose to.
Now let me go to sleep.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and because I do feel for people who just don't like to write, and I do just want to say that there are other ways of externalizing it, and like you said, having that kinesthetic approach. And one that I came across recently was somebody walking me through this amazing imaginative process.
Mm.
And I think the question they asked me was, what are you like when you're at your best? Um, and I had to kind of like visualize it. Um, I ultimately came up with some kind of like firework thing. It was a really um, powerful visualization. And, and then there were a few more questions like, okay, so, what would you need to, I can't even remember them, but it was just purely working with the image. We didn't have to analyze the bloody
Yeah.
image. It wasn't like, okay, so what does a firework mean to you? There was none of that. You were just taking that image and letting it speak. And that for me was like had the same effect of journaling as journaling, but just in a completely different way. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I'm guessing so, that I've heard it as that higher self. What does that higher self need from you or would look like from you if you're in that space? And then, oh, I just blanked on the other question.
So what does it need? What does that self,
Yeah,
your best self, need from you? Is that
yeah, something
huh?
along that line. In that,
Yeah.
yeah, and so you're trying to shift from this place of constriction, right, to a place of
Mm.
expansion. So then you
Yeah.
become the observer versus you're entrenched in that thought process.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. And you're right.
Yeah.
There's definitely many ways versus just journaling, the visualization. For some people, they like to create poetry. Some people like to
Yeah.
paint. Any of that is still connecting you with expanding versus getting
Mm.
stuck in that place of fear or constriction. So,
Right.
all good things. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm going to kind of pivot just a little bit and I'm going to ask you a question about who inspires you, like whether it's current, whether they're alive or they're not. Who or what really like inspires you at times when you just need some inspiration?
It's usually, embarrassingly, it's a lot of crusty old white men philosophers. And I wish I could say something more interesting, but at the moment, that's what I've been really digging. Um,
Beautiful.
Psychologists, philosophers, these old books, and how a lot of people are making that really accessible to me right now. There's this great um, philosopher, Pete Rollins. He's doing some really amazing work trying to make a lot of these concepts really um, tangible for me as somebody who hasn't like really studied philosophy formally. So that's what I'm digging right now. But honestly, these things change a lot for me, and I'm always looking at something to feed my mind and my heart. And yeah, there's always a lot.
And I love that. That's where you are right now in your life. And as in any typical, introvert, we do often change. And I know many of my listeners are like avid readers as well, whether that's they pick up a book like I do or they listen to it. And that's feeding that introversion part too, right? Just that depth of information, but also not not escaping into that to avoid what you also are going towards in your life, but to glean this information to grow internally as well with that information.
Yeah,
Love.
it's curiosity, and I think I like to say that curiosity is one of my biggest weapons, if not my biggest weapon against fear,
Yes,
because if I'm curious about the outcome of something, I'm going to do it even if I'm scared, because that curiosity is stronger.
absolutely. All right. So Kat, I'm curious. I know we're kind of wrapping things up here, and I so appreciate you being on today. I know that you have something free for my listeners as well. So would you mind sharing what it is that you have for them? And ladies, I'm going to have this on the show notes as well. That's where I typically put all those links for her website, her social media, all of this good stuff.
Well, what I'd like to offer is for your listeners to give me 30 days of having me in their inbox. So, I mean, it's a big commitment, I realize that, but it's how I get to know people. I send you 30 days of, I guess, creative prompts to kind of start a coaching relationship with each other. And basically, you don't have to reply to all of these emails, but if you do have any thoughts, or if I've like triggered something, if you've got a reply to a question or have a question for me, that's basically what we do. So it's basically a month of chatting, digital pen pals, I guess.
Hmm. Well, I love it. I think it's such a generous thing that you're offering, and how fun, because it's like, oh, to get you again kind of in the right side of your brain to really expand that a little bit. I love it. And ladies, her website is called thecreativeintrovert.com. And then when you go,
Absolutely.
yeah, and then when you go on social media for Twitter or Instagram, it's creative intro. And
Mm-hmm.
that's her handle on both of those. So Kat, I just can't say thank you enough for being on and sharing so much about your own personal journey, and again helping helping introverts know there's nothing wrong with them. It's okay to embrace those parts of them that need more of the downtime, or think more inside of their own inner world, but to really also share that with the world, because everybody has such incredible gifts, and that you help them really step into that. So thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. I really love speaking to you. It's been an honor.
Thank you for listening. Go out to selfcaresummitforwomen.com and sign up before October 7th to join our free self-care summit, improve your bottom line and your personal life.